Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to 2021. In this video, I want to go through my impressions shooting with the Sony FX6. I recently had the opportunity to actually take it out and put rubber to the road, see how this thing actually performs, and I uploaded some test footage which you can actually watch. I'll leave a link in the description down below if you haven't already seen that first. And this is basically a follow-up video to that, just to give you my thoughts and my impressions of how I felt using the camera, and again, some practical considerations if you're still thinking about purchasing it. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to cover is kind of how I shot the test. I went out to my local city down here in Melbourne, Australia, and I went and shot some test footage around the place. It was an awful day to begin with. It wasn't great. It was very cloudy, and basically as I was taking this video footage, it didn't look great. You know, at the end of the day, when you're taking footage of anything, you're obviously needing to make sure that your lighting is right, your composition is right, and all these things come together. If you have an interesting location, interesting background, if you have a great lighting, all of these things will come together to create amazing imagery. But when it's overcast weather, you're filming a whole bunch of random test shots really of nothing. It looks like more like stock footage than anything. I guess my idea was to actually go out and use the camera, practically seeing how it performs when you're out there in the field. When you want to grab a shot and you're seeing how the autofocus works, or you're wanting to change a setting and you're seeing how long that takes you to do that. I think these test shoots are really important. And if you have a new camera, the more you can do, the better, just to become well acquainted with it and actually get to know it and know its strengths and weaknesses. And also, I guess, again, get a bit more efficient at actually operating and using it. So the first thing I want to address is actually my colors in the video, because to be honest, this is one of those things that hindsight being 2020, I would have done something a little bit differently. Basically, as you may already know if you're watching this video, the Sony FX6 shoots a profile called S-Cinetone. If you want to get amazing colors out of the camera, this is the profile you would go for. The color science is derived from the Sony Menus line, which is obviously Sony's very high-end cinema cameras. And that would be great if you're looking for something with a quick turnaround. Weddings, documentaries, things where you're not going to have an opportunity to do a full grade of everything. You're just going to go ahead and get the footage and deliver it straight away. S-Cinetone will be the way to go. In this case, when I originally shot the video, I thought to myself I was going to do a full grade, make it look as good as possible, and then upload it to the internet. But the more I thought about that, the more I thought, well, that's very subjective. That's my view on how I think the footage should look. That's a lot of primary and secondary adjustments in the grade, which again, people might get the wrong idea and think this is what they're going to get straight out of the camera. And I thought it'd be a pretty ingenuine test. So what I ended up doing was shooting S-Log and applying a simple LUT transform over to Rec 709, which is what I uploaded. So in reality, the colors you're going to get out of this camera are probably going to be better if you shoot S-Cinetone, and I wish I had shot S-Cinetone if I was thinking like that on the day I was actually shooting. But hopefully it still gives you an idea, I guess, of the quality of the footage. And hopefully in this video as well, I'm going to overlay some of the footage I shot again with a bit more of a grade applied to the S-Log footage rather than just the Rec 709 transfer. So you can kind of see, again, gauge how it looks a little bit better from the original test footage that I uploaded a couple of weeks back. Now, a lot of this as well was just testing default features in the camera, seeing how they perform. As I said, going through the settings and how long did things take me. One of the great things about this camera and the amazing things about it, and the reason why someone would buy this camera in the first place, is it has something called a variable ND filter. Again, you probably already know what that means if you're watching this video, but this is the first time I was using it, and it was pretty amazing. It made the whole operation of the camera idiot-proof, really. I turned on the auto ND, and what happened was straight away throughout the entire day, the camera was just adjusting the exposure for me. And it did a really good job of it. For the most part, it was very seamless. It wasn't too quick to respond. It wouldn't do weird things where it would just change the exposure suddenly. And that was great. Obviously, if it had done that, it would have been much more of an unusable feature. One thing I did notice though, is it's not super intelligent towards what's in the actual shot. And again, I don't mind the operation like this because I want it to be a bit more objective as a feature rather than thinking, oh, well, actually, he probably wants to expose for the face and then therefore adjust the ND that way. But I did notice when I was taking a shot of my mate who I was with at the time, under shade, there was a little bit of the sky in the background, obviously just, you know, outside of that shade. And the ND was trying to do its best to balance for both of those. So it was really trying to protect the highlights. And as a result, basically all the information of my friend's face was getting pushed into the shadows and the lower mid-tones, which wasn't ideal, obviously. If that's the shot I wanted to get of his face, I would have had to take control of that and go ahead and probably decrease the amount of ND that was being applied to that particular shot. So it's not perfect, but in most cases throughout the day, I just didn't have to turn it off at all. I didn't have to worry about it. And again, if you're pointing it at one thing and there's not too many things that are coming through the shot and changing the exposure, I think it's an amazing feature, and it's really one of the things that makes this camera shine above some of the competition, because a lot of the competition doesn't have that. One of the things I noticed as well is straight out of the box, the camera has some autofocus settings applied to it in terms of sensitivity and response. They're too quick in my opinion. Again, depending on what you're looking for, I noticed straight away, because this is one of the weird things, because the autofocus is actually so responsive and very, very good at what it does. If you have the response set too high, you're gonna find it just sort of grabbing onto things here and there. Reducing those settings would be well recommended. The first shot I actually uploaded in my test footage, it was literally that. I was taking a shot of the tram going down Burke Street, and as people entered the frame, the Sony FX6 caught their faces right away, and it just snapped to them straight away. So as I was trying to get that tram, obviously my shot was just, the camera decided that the focus was gonna be a little bit different, and it was actually gonna focus on the people. That probably could have been solved by using just one of the different autofocus modes and turning off face and eye priority. But again, something to keep in mind that you probably want to turn down those settings, so as soon as something enters the frame, it doesn't just change straight away, and not only that, change very quickly. So another thing that's been brought up before is Max from MaxTech said he had an issue with his FX6 where it would find a face in the shot, but it wouldn't focus to that face. I have experienced that issue myself on several occasions at this point. It's not the worst thing in the world, and it doesn't always happen. It's not very constant, but you will find again that the camera will find a face. There'll be a box around that person's face, and it knows that they're there, but the lens doesn't do anything to actually focus towards them. And even waiting a prolonged period of time, the lens doesn't do anything. But I found if I go ahead and manually focus it and pull the person's face into focus, the camera then does snap on. So I'm hoping that it's just a bug in the system, and obviously with a firmware update, it will be fixed. But otherwise, it has been a little bit strange. Even when obviously my settings are face eye priority, it's still not choosing to find that person's face. I would definitely say you want to map face eye priority or that setting into a custom button, for example, because by default, it's just so difficult to get to quickly. If you want to turn it off in a pinch to not have on one shot, it's just going to take you a little while to go through the menus. So definitely go ahead and do that first. Would be my one recommendation if you just pull this camera out of the box. So to one of the downsides I want to talk about in this video, and again, from the very day dot I decided on this camera, I knew this was going to be a pain to kind of address and go through, but it's the user experience of using this Sony FX6. Now, obviously, if you're someone who's used an FS5 before, or you've been in the Sony ecosystem, FS7, you've got an FX9, this is all gonna feel very natural to you. So again, this is probably not indicative of your experience as it is of mine, coming from the Canon system, Canon C200 before this. The Canon system was just so much more intuitive, and everything, I guess, made a lot more sense to me. And I found that obviously made the operation of the camera much faster. Whereas the FX6 is a bit more of a learning curve. I'm still going through that learning curve, and I just find at certain occasions I do need to think a lot more before I actually change a setting. But again, I'm hopeful that the more I use the camera, I'm able to kind of develop more muscle memory and develop some heuristics, these shortcuts in my mind where I'm able to kind of quickly do things without having to think too much. But right now, for example, when I got out there, I forgot that I hadn't formatted my cards yet, so I went to go format my SD cards. The Sony presents you two options, either a quick format or a full format. Doing some reading and finding out what those are, that sounds absolutely fine. In terms of a quick format, wouldn't actually delete the data, but would eventually just be able to let the camera override it basically, whereas a full format would actually fully format the card. But again, as I'm kind of there on the day, I'm suddenly stopped and I'm thinking to myself, do I want to do a quick format? Do I want to do a full format? And I find a lot of the times maybe the camera's presenting you options and you have to think about these options when you don't necessarily, I guess, want to take up your mental bandwidth that way. And I know with the C200, I didn't have this issue. When I went to go initialize a card, they call it initialize rather than format, just one option, one click and it's done. So I really like that about the Canon system compared to the Sony system. And the menus do get a little bit confusing as well. There's a lot of different options under a lot of different places. And even more frustratingly is they've put options in multiple places. So you might find the same option for zoom in one place as another category down the line in the menu. And as a result, you tend to find that the learning curve is longer because you don't remember exactly where that is. And because the menus therefore aren't laid out in a very logical sense where, okay, that would definitely be under this one, it would definitely be under this category, you do tend to find that, for me anyway, it takes me a lot longer to find those particular settings. So I would say someone coming to the Sony system from another system, this is going to be a bit more of a learning curve. The camera itself produces amazing images, but of course you do need to kind of work with that system and kind of go through those menu options. And again, I'm just hopeful that the more use I have with this camera, the more I will get much more comfortable with operating it and knowing exactly where everything is. One of the big things that I guess sort of separates this from the A7S III, despite the fact that they use the same sensor, is the FX6 gives you the opportunity to actually turn off noise reduction in camera, which would then allow you to go ahead and I guess apply that later on, retain more of the detail in the actual image. Whereas people have reported on the A7S III when they're shooting obviously in lower light conditions, the footage can look a little bit mushy because the cameras are quite aggressively applying a lot of noise reduction. Now, out of the box, at least for my model, there was no noise reduction setting turned on, and that's how I've been shooting the entire time. I think even at this point, I'm shooting this video without noise reduction. And it just means obviously when I take it into DaVinci Resolve later on, or your editing software of choice, I am seeing a lot of noise in that particular image. And as I'm looking at that image, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm gonna have to denoise this. So I would suggest if you are someone, again, using this camera for quick deliverables, quick turnarounds, and again, corporate work, for example, where you don't want to have to spend time doing temporal or spatial noise reduction on the footage, which will take up a lot of processing power, to at least turn it to low or medium. Probably wouldn't go high for the most part, because again, that's probably gonna be too aggressive of a noise reduction, but having just some form of noise reduction turned on would be helpful, again, just to save you time in the post-production part of your workflow. So to wrap this up, how did I find shooting with the FX6 and the end result that I got from it? Well, as I've kind of mentioned, there were some great things about using this camera in terms of the auto ND, which just made my life a breeze, and basically, to put this into perspective, I shot everything in S-Log, and I was able to go into DaVinci Resolve and just drag and drop a LUT onto the footage, basically. And from that, uploaded it to YouTube. So everything you're seeing, there are no adjustments made to exposure because everything was perfectly exposed. And I think that is one of the things out of this camera that just makes it an absolute dream to use in that respect. But of course, the menu systems for me leave a little bit to be desired, as I knew they would. Coming from a Canon background, I've just been spoiled. And in this particular case, it's going to be a learning curve for most of you who haven't used an FX or haven't used a Sony system in the past. The images themselves are fairly detailed. They're not as detailed as an oversampled sensor, as there's been a lot of comparisons online to the FX9, which shoots in a 6K sensor and downsamples to 4K. But I was overall pretty happy with it. I honestly don't like the over-sharpened look too much. Of course, it's always good to have that option, but at the same time, I think something that's a little bit softer with just as long as you've got nice highlight roll-off and you've got a good amount of dynamic range, I think you're really going to be able to get pretty decent images. And thankfully, these days, that's most cameras, which is a pretty great time to be living in 2021. So hopefully this video has been helpful to you again and has set you up for success if you are still expecting an FX6 or you've just got an FX6 and you want to find out maybe the best things to look at. But I would definitely implore you to go out and shoot with it, do these test shoots, see how you find it, see how long it takes you to find the format option to format your card, and you'll know that for next time how long it's going to take you. And the more you do it, the more repetition you can get, the faster you'll be, the more efficient you'll be. And I guess the more comfortable you'll be shooting with it as well, because you'll just have this muscle memory and it will just feel like a much nicer experience. So I hope you all enjoy the start of your new year, and I look forward to seeing you in some videos down the line. Have a good one.